Imagine, just for a moment, being trapped within a coffin made of metal. The oxygen slowly runs low, the pressure outside slowly threatens to rip through your hull, and you are left blind in the dark as the light of the stars fade one by one. It does not matter whether this coffin is a small vessel diving down to explore the depths of an ocean, or a massive space station adrift through the void. When all we have left are coffins, we are each and every one of us already dead. Iron Lung was originally released by solo developer David Szymanski in March of 2022, and is a rather short piece of horror media that paints a bleak look at a dying universe. The stars and planets have all vanished, humanity clings to fading space stations, and the only organic matter found within the cold, dead universe are oceans of blood scattered across several dark moons. This video will be a little different from my previous ones, as while I will be covering the game Iron Lung, its endings, and the secrets scattered throughout, more has been added to this twisted tale. The game was adapted into a full theatrical movie by Mark Fishback, otherwise known as Markiplier, which released right at the end of January 2026. While the movie and the game exist within their own canons, according to Szymanski, the movie expands upon many of the questions posed by the game, answering some of them while opening up new ones for speculation. The original game worked as a piece of atmospheric horror that felt claustrophobic and isolating, preying on a player's desires to explore the desolate seabed to draw them into the mysteries. The movie, however, paints this ocean as something decidedly more eldritch. What I will not be doing, however, is a review of the movie, as that's not really what this channel is about. Rather, I will provide my own speculation for what the entity is and what secrets lie beneath the blood. This will be your spoiler warning for both the game and the movie, so if you've not experienced either yet, now is your chance to pause the video and do so. For those of you wishing to delve into the scarlet seas of AT5, welcome to Iron Lung, where the void holds the keys to humanity's salvation and its extinction. Upon beginning our journey, the game lays out its premise for us, the most exposition we will get through our initial playthrough. The universe experienced a bizarre phenomenon that the remainder of humanity has named the Quiet Rapture. All stars, habitable planets, and people on those worlds vanished in an instant. Those that survived were aboard starships and space stations where an issue quickly presented itself. Too many mouths to feed and not enough resources to go around. Humanity huddled around the fading ghost light of the stars, too far away for their light to blink out as the star died, and searched across barren moons for resources. In their search, they beheld something strange. Oceans of blood scattered over the surface of one such desolate moon. We are a convict put into the submarine SM-13, nicknamed the Iron Lung, tasked with exploring the bottom of this ocean in exchange for our freedom. Due to the immense pressure that the SM-13 was not designed to handle, we will be welded into the submersible and the front window will be shut, leaving us alone and isolated within this metal canister, unable to see what is around us and unable to escape. The mission begins with us being lowered into the ocean while a voice speaks to us over the intercom. As the front porthole is sealed shut for our own safety, the voice warns us that there have been some irregularities with the equipment, and that we should be careful of any sparks. Once we reach our maximum depth, the voice begins to cut out, the blood blocking the radio signal. From this point on, we're on our own. We're also now able to wander around the ship and look over our controls, as the game does not simply have us pilot our vessel, but instead control the person operating it. Unlike other games where our vehicle may serve as the stand-in for our character, Iron Lung goes out of its way to make it feel like this rusting piece of iron is our new jail cell. Without a way to see out front, our navigation is limited to the console. On the left, we can see our bearings, which can be rotated with the two buttons just below, and the right side of the console holds our X and Y coordinates, the two arrows allowing us to move only forward and back. On either side of the console, we can also see our current depth at the bottom of the blood ocean and, more concerningly, our current levels of oxygen. Seeing as we are welded within here, we only have so much oxygen on board, putting a timer on our mission here. Of course, we can also look around and see more of the vessel and all of the extra equipment on board. Other than a fire extinguisher on the wall should we need it, there are 3 other items of interest. Moving into the back, there's a computer terminal on the right side, which will come in useful later. On the left is a large screen attached to the camera that we will be using to take our pictures. Lastly, the back of the ship has the button to activate our camera, and after taking a moment to process, we can see the twisting roots that grow along the sea floor. Of course, we are not sent down here without any ideas as to what we are supposed to be doing, and the first note we can make mention of is our mission briefing. 2 weeks ago, a 4th blood ocean was discovered resting on the moon of AT-5, and the deep trench at the bottom caught the attention of our captors. Our task is to navigate through the trench and locate several points of interest that have been identified, capturing photographs of whatever we find. While the camera may be used to help with navigation, we will need to primarily rely on our coordinates and a provided map. Should we approach any obstacles, the vehicle is equipped with proximity sensors to alert us and prevent us from crashing into the rocks. Consulting the map, as faded and incomplete in areas as it is, we can take notice of 10 different points of interest. Some lie in open sections of the trench, whereas others will require traversing through narrow tunnels. With the oxygen supply slowly running out, we are left with no choice but to begin. Navigation is slow and steady, switching between adjusting the controls and consulting the map to blindly move through the thick ichor. Every so often, our proximity sensor will go off as we move too close to the trench walls, cutting through the sounds of the vessel creaking or the blood moving around us. The first of the points of interest does not take too long to find, and when we activate the camera, what we find is a bit strange, but nothing too unusual. There are several tall rocks sticking up out of the sediment, looking almost like they have been placed upright with purpose. As we move to head back up front, something does catch our eyes. There is a note lying just next to the terminal, and when we pick it up, it seems to have been left by the previous pilot.
This is not an expedition. It is an execution. When they put you in here, they don't want you to return. And even if you do, and even if they keep their promises, what freedom waits for you? A few dying ships and a sea of dead stars? If there is still hope, it lies beyond the veil. Hope in this void is as illusionary as the starlight. I will choose to breathe my last here, at the bottom of the ocean, unseen, unheard, and uncontrolled. They will get their execution. I will get my freedom.
The second point of interest we come across is rather similar to the first one, looking akin to large rocks sticking out of the seabed. These ones appear to be much thinner, however, and it isn't too hard to imagine the arrangement being the rib bones of some long-dead creature. With 2 clusters of rocks now analyzed, we start to make our way towards the third point of interest, and as we are concentrating on the controls, a sudden beeping noise startles us. That beeping was to alert us to our depleting oxygen supply, spurring us onwards. Along our search, there are other noises outside of the submarine besides the rumbling of the blood as the ship passes through it. A low groaning can occasionally be heard off in the distance, no doubt the sounds of gases escaping through the crust of the moon and bubbling up through the blood. A dull, low grinding or burrowing noise can also be heard, slowly growing in volume as we approach the third point of interest, and actually helping us in locating where it is. When we take a picture of it, it appears to be large, banded, tube-like structures arching out of the sediment. Along with the grinding noise, it's possible that these structures are actually somewhat organic, being strange worms that have adapted to life within the ichor. They do not appear to move, however, remaining somewhat stationary, but prove to be a much more intriguing find. The game makes good use of its atmosphere, as not only is the ambient noise eerie and somewhat tense, aiding in the feeling of a person's claustrophobia and thalassophobia, but the game is littered with small jump scares here and there. The warning about the lowering oxygen level is one such jump scare, but others, such as valves opening to release excess pressure, make the player feel as though the blood ocean could crush the ship and them inside at any time. And still other scares follow us around, and after moving through a narrow channel, our sensors suddenly pick up a presence approaching the vessel from the left side, before moving away and releasing a distant roar. It isn't the only noise we hear, as an ambient humming noise starts to grow louder. What this humming is, I was not able to figure out, as the noise disappears as we reach the next point of interest. Hopefully, whatever this one is will dispel our growing sense of dread and put our anxieties to rest. We are not alone down here. A haunting face peers back at us through the gloom, and when we take another picture to verify that it's actually just another structure, it vanishes into the murk. More on edge than we were before, we continue to make our way forwards, the occasional bangs on the hull leaving us hoping whatever's out there will leave us alone. If we needed more confirmation that there is life down in the blood, we can find evidence that something used to live down here. The next point of interest, only a short distance away from the last, is the most interesting one yet, as it is a very distinct skeleton of some sort of creature. The game's achievement system makes mention that this is not the skeleton of a whale, and judging by the shape of the skull and the broad, flat teeth, it looks almost bovine to me. What the skeleton of a cow is doing at the bottom of a blood ocean is beyond us at this point, and we can only hope for more answers further ahead. The sixth point of interest lies beyond one of these narrow sections of tunnel, and after threading the ship between the walls of the trench, we come across perhaps the most perplexing discovery yet. Here, in the pitch darkness at the bottom of an ocean of blood, is a visible structure, several windows visible along the front wall. This building is rather clearly assembled, looking like it's made of stone with distinct pillars between the windows. It raises many more questions for us to answer, and if we listen closely, there's an odd strobing noise that seems to be coming from the structure, or at least from something nearby. We have over half of the pictures we need to collect, however, and the remaining 4 lie on the north side of the trench. Making our way back through the narrow channel, our ship collides with something violently hard, and when we go to take a picture of whatever it was we hit, we see nothing but open, inky darkness. Returning to the console, we can notice that whatever hit us didn't jostle us around slightly. We are now in a different place on the map altogether. Thankfully, it puts us a bit closer to where we are trying to go, and so we can continue north into the more winding region of the map. The presence from before makes itself known once again, this time appearing on our right side before vanishing just as swiftly as it appears. And at this point, I can't stop feeling as though I'm being watched. Between getting knocked around and the proximity sensor going off repeatedly in the open ocean, I keep feeling like I'm being hunted. By this point, the sight of the 7th anomaly casts an eerie feeling over the player. Several spines arch up above the ground, and while finding a single skeleton was one thing, suggesting life was at the very least present, multiple skeletons suggest it was not quite so rare. The final 3 anomalies lie further north beyond a section of the map that is smudged over. As such, we will need to pass through the tight corridor via our proximity sensors, hoping we don't crash. The odd humming noise returns, off in the distance, but the noise that catches our attention is another loud beeping noise, and another warning that our oxygen is halfway empty. As we start to move through the narrow corridor, we can stop to take a moment and photograph the walls. The game does not prompt us to do so, leaving the secrets for us alone to find. Contrary to what we may have initially thought, the walls of this tunnel aren't made of natural rock, but of the same material that made up the structures we found before. As we leave this tunnel, another ambient noise slowly starts to catch our attention over the humming. It's a sort of crackling noise, almost like a fire. The sparks from the equipment at the back of the vessel have at last caused a fire to break out, and we quickly grab the nearby fire extinguisher before the fire causes the entire submarine to explode. With the disaster taken care of, we make our way to the closest available point of interest, the rocks looking rather strange at first. Getting a better angle, we can see them more clearly to be bones, and the discovery feels rather mundane at this point. Clearly there is much more life in this blood sea than we initially believed, the skull of this dead creature looking similar to the skull we found before. The 9th point of interest lies at the end of a narrow tunnel, forcing us to be incredibly careful as we make our way through. And yet our attention is pulled away by a much stranger humming noise, which left me feeling uncomfortable for a reason I could not quite describe. Approaching the point of interest, the noise grows incredibly loud, and whatever is out there begins to exert its influence on us, our vision vibrating back and forth. Taking a picture of what it is that is in front of us, we can see a brilliant, shining light. Taking multiple pictures, it seems to be flashing and moving around erratically, its power clearly felt from our proximity to it. I don't know what it was about it that unnerved me so, but when I played the game, I felt genuinely terrified to be near it. Perhaps feeding into that fear was the fact that I could hear this anomaly, the noise moving around me in my headphones as both the submarine and my character moved around. It helped make this light feel as though it really were in front of my submersible, and I was all too glad to get the hell out of that tunnel. As we flee, however, our ship is knocked around again, and trying to take another picture of whatever it was that hit us reveals nothing. Returning to the console, however, we have once again been moved around the map, now outside of the tunnel. We only have one more point of interest to photograph, and feeling tense from that light, I have grown eager to take the picture and get out of that ocean. On our way there, however, moving towards a narrow section of the tunnel leading to the caverns housing the final point of interest, whatever has been chasing us now blocks our way. The proximity alarm alerts us to its presence directly in front of us, finally allowing us to take a picture of this creature. Whatever this thing is, it knows we are here, it knows that we are looking around, and now it has made it known that it sees us. This ocean is not safe for us, it never was, and so we head to the last point of interest so we can get the fuck out of here and back onto dry land. The creaking of our ship alerts us to the damage that the creature has caused by knocking us around. This submarine was never meant for this depth, and now it is beginning to buckle under the pressure. The metal groans horribly as the blood threatens to spill in and crush us, and were that not bad enough, one more oxygen warning lets us know we are rapidly running out of time. However, it seems the damage from that last impact was too much, and now the submarine has sprung a leak. Blood has begun to rise up around us, threatening to drown us in scarlet liquid. All there is left for us is to cling to the hope that those above will be able to pull us out in time, but at this point our fate has become clear. This is no longer a submarine, but an iron coffin. Death will come to us in one way or another, and before we finally surrender to the inevitable, we can at least learn what this final point of interest holds. Surely, whatever lies on the other side of that camera will hold the final piece to understanding why we are sent down here, and why the planets and stars disappeared. All we need to do is hit that button one more time, and all our questions will be answered. Our expedition ended in failure, and ultimately raised more questions than it answered. The vessel was torn apart and scattered across the trench as though ripped apart by some massive and hostile creature. Unfortunately, our wreck was deemed beyond salvage, and the photographs we took could not be recovered. The universe continues to die, the last of the Starlight shining as pale as bones. This moon, like many others, is but a lifeless corpse, the blood sea a festering wound on its surface. But we are left with one final message. Somewhere in the void, there must be hope. True to the ending card, our expedition raised more questions than answers, but what we found is not all there is to see within the trench. There was actually more for us to explore within the northeast caverns, and if we start up another playthrough, we can take a quick look around. While I did play up the feeling that our time was running out for the sake of the story, the truth of the matter is that the game does not actually use any timers. The oxygen running out, the rising blood, the encounters with the monster, they are all set to static triggers placed around the map, and we can actually take as much time as we like to look around. Not only that, but the game's ending, where the creature breaks into the submersible and kills us, only triggers once we have reached the final point of interest, regardless of which point of interest we leave until last. As such, we can start up a new playthrough and head straight towards the 10th point of interest, the one we did not get the chance to actually see, and I am left with a sense of both being confused and underwhelmed. The 10th point of interest is another structure, exactly the same as the one we originally found, yielding no new insights into our situation here. This building, however, is not the only point of interest housed in this section of the map, even if they are not labeled on it. We will move through this cavern in a clockwise direction, heading first up the tunnel around a curve towards the most northeastern section we can reach. There, the humming noise returns, but not the same one from the light. This one is much less creepy, but nonetheless helps to guide us towards the source of the noise. That source happens to be a solitary standing rock, which has been nicknamed as the Humming Monolith. Besides this peculiar noise, there does not seem to be much else we can glean from its existence, unlike the final object we can find here. Continuing clockwise towards the southeast chamber, the final discovery is much more cleverly hidden, as there is no sound to help locate it. Instead, we are to follow the order to use the camera to help us navigate, eventually finding a strange shape in the gloom. This odd shape is the wreckage of another submarine, this one torn in half by some horrid monster, and by circling around it, we can eventually find the name of this submarine written on the side, the SM-8. It's clear that we are not the first to have been sent down here to explore the Blood Ocean, and we were not the first to perish down here. This is all we can find while exploring the depths, and so if we wish to learn a bit more about who we are and why we're down here, we'll need to start looking towards one part of our ship that I have neglected to talk about. Over by the camera is a terminal we can type prompts into in order to access a local database aboard the submersible. As we start to experiment with inputs, we may unearth one or two entries which will point us in the direction of other prompts to use, and it is here the story of the game is actually told. Not only are we given a collection of events that have occurred, we are also given accompanying dates that flesh out an alternative history to this universe, through the calendar known as the Epoch of Interplanetary Colonization, or EIC. The calendar's year 0 begins in 1992, when humanity first colonized their closest planetary neighbor, Mars. Where dates are given, I will be using our standard Julian calendar, which the game makes easy to convert because the EIC calendar is based around Earth's rotation. It was the standard calendar used by much of humanity, with the exception of those living on Mars. By the year 2135, Mars surpassed Earth in terms of population, becoming the most populated planet controlled by humanity. Martian pride resulted in them distancing themselves from the rest of humanity by developing their own calendar, known as the Interstellar Martian Calendar, or IMC. This calendar used the rotation of Mars instead of Earth, meaning its years are 1.8 years longer than years calculated in the interplanetary calendar. Mars was poised to officially adopt this Martian calendar, but would never get the chance. Without warning, all radio contact was lost with every planet in the year 2349. At the time contact was lost, there are no records of anyone having visual contact with any star or planets, or experiencing anything unusual. As such, the exact mechanisms of what occurred are unknown. All we do know is the result. Every major celestial body vanished from the universe all at once. Stars and planets vanished in an instant, and all life that existed on those planets disappeared alongside them. The only objects left remaining in the universe were moons, asteroids, space stations, and starships, and the remaining humans that inhabited them. This event became known as the Quiet Rapture, and marked the instant that the universe died, and when humanity drew its last shuddering breath. After this event, those that remained were sent to investigate where the celestial bodies had been, finding only empty space left behind. Any place that was once habitable had vanished, leaving only desolate and inhospitable rocks behind. Both within the game and without, there are multiple theories as to what exactly happened. Some claim the event to be that of the biblical rapture, with everything that has disappeared being uplifted into the spiritual heavens. Others point towards some sort of quantum anomaly that ripped apart large objects, such as an expedited version of heat death. Still, more theories swirl that the Quiet Rapture was purposefully orchestrated by something much more cosmic and sinister. To date, no theory has had any evidence to prove or disprove it. What remained of humanity banded together into factions, one of which was the Consolidation of Iron. Currently composed of 3 space stations and 2 starships, the Consolidation of Iron held a population of only 257 people at the time the entry was recorded in the terminal, and was built off of the principle of collectivism and ruled by popular vote. Their name came from the metal used to construct their two main space stations, as well as the collective's unity in the face of outside threats, not the least of which were other factions of humanity. At a time, a fourth station existed within the COI's control named Filament Station, and served as the largest center of population within the faction. That is, until the interference of Eden. Eden served as a rival faction to the COI and is the single largest space station that still remains following the Quiet Rapture. What sets them apart specifically from the rest of humanity is that Eden was primarily composed of former Martian citizens, and as such they held an intense spirit of patriotism and independence. This patriotism is so extreme that they have even done away with the interstellar calendar, favoring the Martian calendar in its place. This put them at odds with the collectivist ideals of the COI, the terminal even mentioning that Eden is a persistent threat to the security and sanctity of their organization, but as it stands, Eden holds the high ground. Their population stands at 468 individuals, nearly double that of the Consolidation of Iron, and hold the only known trees left within the universe. Tensions between the two factions escalated, likely over dwindling resources, until 2354, only 5 years after the Quiet Rapture, when the Battle of Filament Station broke out. The conflict took place over the course of 9 days, and only concluded when Eden forces sabotaged the station's nuclear reactor core, destabilizing it. The resulting disaster was catastrophic, and while we do not know how many people were on Filament Station at the time, the reactor meltdown left the entire station irradiated and uninhabitable. Many of Eden's surviving forces from the battle were taken as prisoners of war under the Consolidation of Iron, and the whole ordeal has painted Eden as the highest threat to the people of the COI. The prisoners that were taken were not to be incarcerated, however, as there is simply not enough resources to waste on useless convicts. Instead, they would need to earn their right to eat, and through enough service to the COI, earn their freedom and integrate into their society. Thus, the COI employs a practice called conviction realization, which their criminal justice system has deemed a humane method of dealing with criminals. In order to pay off one's crimes, they will be forced to perform services that benefit the entire collective, such as performing maintenance on the various stations and ships, and performing scientific surveys. For the prisoners from the Battle of Filament Station, it is likely their sentence will last nearly 20 years before they are eligible to reintegrate back into society. Despite all of the faction turmoil, scientific endeavors have occurred to find methods of generating resources to keep humanity alive, and it is during the exploration of a barren moon that humanity first encountered an ocean of blood. In total, 4 different oceans have been discovered across different moons, and for the longest time the oceans on Z8 were used for conviction realization. By sending prisoners down in the oceans to survey what is down there, further questions have been raised and very little answers have been gleaned. The COI has confirmed that the oceans are made up exclusively of human blood, but why it is there, where it comes from, or even how it maintains its liquid state is unclear. With the discovery of the ocean on AT5, however, the COI's interests have shifted towards the large trench at the bottom. This led to the creation of 4 underwater crafts to be used in exploring the blood oceans, one of which is the SM-13 that we piloted through the game. It is specifically designed with deep liquid photography in mind, but this hasn't stopped rumors from spreading that the SM-13 and other submersibles like it are actually a means of execution. Many have begun to speculate that the COI has been using the exploration of the blood oceans as an excuse to allow forced suffocation of its prisoners, although the COI has discredited these allegations and proven them to be false. That being said, the SM-13 isn't the only submersible that we know about, as hidden beneath the blood was the wreckage of another ship. If we poke around the database a bit more, we can find a document about the SM-8 vehicle we encountered, but this entry is far different from the previous one. This one, it seems, was not written by the COI, but instead a former convict aboard the Iron Lung.
Hopefully they don't redact this before updating the database. What most people don't understand is that not all subs are built equal. The SM-8 isn't a burner sub. It really is for exploring and surveying blood oceans. If they send you down in the Iron Lung, they don't give a fuck if you come back, or if the sub comes back, because it's a pile of garbage and you're a piece of shit. If you come back with photos, great. You sit down there, you suffocate quietly, even better. But if they send the SM-8 down, One of the scientists is piloting, and they all expect them to return. And now, the SM-8 is in the blood ocean in pieces. No, not hit a rock pieces or sprung a leak pieces. It looks like something tore it up. And the weirdest thing is that nobody else seems surprised. We might have found the first planetary life since the Rapture, and they're acting like it's no big deal. I know you're next in line for realization in the Iron Lung, and usually that means you won't be seeing the stars again. But they don't have a SM-8 anymore. They have 3 burner subs and a lot of curiosity about AT-5. And maybe that means you have a chance.
With that, we have collected all of the information that we can find within the game itself, and it leaves quite the mystery in its wake. A mystery we can only grab a few more pieces to, but to do so we will need to look at the game's files. There are a few things we can take note of here, such as the name of the entity that kills us at the end being named as the Frog, but the last clue for us to find is the name of the light that we encountered in the Northwest Tunnel. Curiously enough, the file labels this light as the Void. Analyzing the story of this game is rather hard because so much of it is left intentionally vague and shrouded in mystery. However, that is likely due to the fact that the mystery is the point of the game's story, as it leaves it up to the player to come up with their own theories as to what exactly is really going on here. We are left just as much in the dark about the truth of the quiet rapture and the blood oceans as this universe's inhabitants, and so we will need to read between the lines a little bit. I started to formulate my own theories both about the game and the movie before looking online at other angles, as there are really many different ways to interpret the events of the game. I have seen theories that this universe is actually purgatory, or that we were removed from the universe and not the other way around. I have even seen multiple arguments for how the consolidation of iron mirrors the USSR and communism, while Eden is far closer to America and its ideals of liberty and individualism. By far my favorite theory is that the Quiet Rapture is exactly what it sounds like, and there is quite a bit of evidence to back it up. The Quiet Rapture was actually the rapture of biblical myth, and the remains of humanity are left to wander through tribulation. As much as I would like to cover that theory, I also don't want to copy another creator's work, and so if you're interested in viewing the story through a religious angle, I would suggest heading toward the video I will leave in the description by Mr. Hunter. He does a great job of painting the story through the lens of it being a true rapture event and how the mysteries of the Blood Ocean tie into the Bible. For those of you interested in what I came up with instead, I will do my best to piece together what I can. First, we can start off with some of the more concrete details that we can extrapolate from our evidence and work our way into the realm of speculation, as there is quite a few inferences that we can make. The first of which is who our character actually is. It is more than likely that our convict was one of the soldiers that participated in the Battle of Filament Station, and that our presence here is retribution for the station's destruction. Considering less hazardous jobs like maintenance are specified as options for conviction realization, it's not too hard to believe that they save the less dangerous options for their own people, while saving the potentially life-threatening jobs for those outside their collective. Despite the consolidation of iron refuting the claims, the Iron Lung is a thinly disguised method of execution, but this time it did not work out quite as planned. The creature destroying the vessel had been, in all likelihood, an accident, but I don't think the COI was all too concerned with properly maintaining the vessel. Instead, it was simply being used until it inevitably gave out. I believe the intended manner for us to die was via suffocation. There are no additional oxygen tanks attached to the vessel, at least that we know of, and are barely given enough oxygen to complete our mission. In all likelihood, the COI was intending for us to collect as much information as we could, die within the ship, and then head down and collect it to be used by the next prisoner. We know we are not the first to pilot the ship due to the presence of the note and the terminal log, but I'm not so sure about the claims that they were written by the same person. The terminal uses a local database to store its information, necessarily meaning whoever wrote the message about the SM-8 would have had to have been aboard the ship. Judging by the contents of that message, it's also easy to say that they were a convict as well, and that was their warning for others after them to stumble across. However, if the SM-13 is indeed being reused for executions, then I find it much harder to believe both notes were written by the same person. If they were, then a physical note is much easier for a cleaning crew to find, and I feel like they would have written their final words on the terminal if they truly wished for them to live on. Speaking of the terminal, we can learn just as much about the story by looking at what information we aren't given as we can by looking what we have. The terminal has redactions all over the place and is painted in a rather heavy bias towards the consolidation of iron. This last point is understandable because it was written by the COI, but there is enough detail left out that leads me to believe they are the aggressors. While Eden is a larger faction, meaning they have more mouths to feed, Eden is also the last station with living trees, which are even stated to reside within a central garden. With living plant life, the people of Eden have a way to naturally recycle their oxygen and potentially grow more food, leaving me to question why they would choose to attack Filament Station. The simple answer could be human greed wanting more resources, but I feel like if Eden had a nefarious reason, it would have been interrogated out of the prisoners and included in the log files. What is more likely is that the consolidation of iron had looked at Eden's resources and wanted it for themselves, leading them to make the first strike. If this is the case, then the Battle of Filament Station was actually a retaliation, and the COI omitted their initial involvement to keep their people in the dark. This is all stretching into speculative territory, and there's no concrete proof that this is the case, but it is a personal theory I wish to include regardless based on the slim information we do know. As for what else we can infer, we will need to look towards AT5 itself and why the COI is so interested in it. There are a myriad of reasons why the COI would be interested in the trench, such as the proof of life within the blood, the strange light down there, or any number of other reasons. The logs are specifically redacted as to what this reason is. One thing they may be interested in are those structures built into the rocky cliffs, suggesting there may have once been a civilization on this moon. Not only that, but a civilization that had discovered a method on how to exist on a barren rock devoid of resources. If this is the case, then it is no wonder the COI is interested in discovering what is down there, as it could be their last hope on how to save humanity. How do we know the people that lived here had access to unique resources? While there's no evidence that the resources were available to the city before the Quiet Rapture, the Blood Ocean itself proves that this moon and others like it have a number of unusual properties. For one thing, we get a pretty good look at the ocean in the main menu, where the blood is quite visibly red. It's not a bright red, but neither is it too dark, and while this could just be an aesthetic choice, I think it leans further into the mystery. Moons are so small that they are unable to maintain a dense, breathable atmosphere, and yet the people of the moon city seem to do just fine. In fact, the root-like structures we photographed as soon as we arrived may have been the remains of some sort of crop. It could have been that the city was under some sort of biodome to maintain the oxygen levels, but whatever atmosphere it did have was absorbed by the blood. Admittedly, the idea that the city managed to create a breathable atmosphere at all is an incredibly far stretch, especially when the blood ocean points towards the fact there is no oxygen remaining. It may, however, point towards the fact that there used to be one here. Typically, deoxygenated blood is rather dark, while oxygen-rich blood is much more vibrant. The blood ocean isn't quite as vibrant as it could be, but it is by no means dark to the point of being deoxygenated. The reason it is a bright red when we bleed is because the hemoglobin within our red blood cells absorbs the oxygen in the air, turning it that iconic scarlet shade. The blood ocean at some point would have absorbed a large amount of oxygen, but the darker shade proves that it is no longer doing so. It could be that whatever atmosphere the moon did have had its oxygen leached out by the blood, which then diffused through the rest of the ocean. If this is the case and there used to be an atmosphere here, then it also stands to reason that oxygen is no longer being synthesized. But I suppose just because there's no oxygen present in an atmosphere does not mean it is not an atmosphere. While most of us are familiar with the concepts of freezing and boiling, we typically only consider one facet of the process. Measurements of Celsius and Fahrenheit only work on Earth because there's a relatively consistent pressure due to our atmosphere, and the fact the blood is in liquid form means it's under a similar amount of pressure. When exposed to the vacuum of space, or even an atmosphere as thin as our moon's, blood will literally boil away as there is not enough pressure to keep it in a liquid form. Another point towards an atmosphere, at least one rich in methane, carbon dioxide, or some other greenhouse gas, is that it is relatively warm. Granted, this is not relative to Earth's temperatures, but it is curious that the blood forms an ocean instead of a glacier. 55% of blood's volume is made up of a yellowish fluid called plasma, which itself is made up of around 90% water. Typically, water freezes once the temperature reaches 0 degrees Celsius, but this can be changed if there is anything dissolved within it. The rest of plasma's volume is composed of proteins, nutrients, salts, and waste products, all of which our blood cells swim inside. These dissolved compounds do affect the freezing point of blood, bringing it down to some point between -2 and -3 degrees Celsius. The blood could be generating heat if it is undergoing some sort of cellular respiration, allowing it to stay above that threshold. This is ignoring the fact that blood does not actually generate heat, as our red blood cells are actually hollowed out corpses incapable of cellular respiration, and that the amount of heat needed to keep it warm would be astronomical. The temperature of our moon, for example, can swing wildly from 120 degrees Celsius to -133 degrees Celsius, depending on what side of the body is facing the sun. But there are no stars in this universe to keep AT5 warm. Without a star to keep the moon warm, it would lose all of its heat, dissipating into the surrounding void. Considering the vacuum of space is only a few degrees above absolute zero, or -273 degrees Celsius, something is generating enough heat to keep the moon warm, and an atmosphere would help aid in holding in that heat. Air is a surprisingly good insulator, keeping heat trapped for longer periods of time than in a vacuum, but the heat would still inevitably dissipate into the surrounding space. If all of this is a little too complicated or tangential, then you're probably wondering when it is that it will get to the point of all this. The point is that clearly there is more happening on these moons than oceans of blood forming, and with the evidence that people once lived here, I believe that they had access to an immense source of energy they could use to terraform desolate worlds, and even now that they are gone, their effects on the moon still linger. This all brings us to the question, finally, of where exactly these people went and what sort of energy they were harvesting, which brings us, finally, to the actual story of this theory. I believe that before the Quiet Rapture, there existed a faction of humanity that tapped into a higher dimension or parallel reality in order to colonize barren worlds, and that it was this civilization that ultimately caused the doom of the universe. At first, they may have only used this discovery to bestow breathable atmospheres onto their moons, but considering moons likely are unsuitable to growing food, these people would have harnessed this energy more and more and more to sustain themselves. Food, water, air, and the supplies to build their great cities were theirs to synthesize from this other realm, and we can find exactly where it is that they opened their gateway. The glowing light we found, the void, is likely the key to understanding the truth to the whole mystery, and while I have heard theories that it may have been a fallen star or some sort of entity all by itself, I believe that this is our gateway. The anomaly is actually a tear in the fabric of reality, and the light that is shining through is actually the presence emanating from the other side of the veil. Whatever is through there is powerful enough to affect us as we approach it, our senses almost seeming as though they are being stretched and squished repeatedly. It's entirely likely that whatever is on the other side is not doing this with intent, but these effects are merely a result of its very presence. And with such raw power from simply existing, I believe the people of this civilization attempted to grab just a bit too much for themselves. I believe that on the other side of this veil was something great, something powerful, and something slumbering. Each time the civilization drew from this entity's power, they would poke at it just a little bit. The more their cities grew, the more energy they would take, and the more often and forceful they would poke at this beast. Inevitably, they either poked too hard, too often, or attempted to draw a lot of power all at once. It could be that they attempted to open a proper gateway, the remains of which are the Terran reality that the light is seeping through, or it could be they were attempting to colonize other moons at the same time. We will never know for sure what the final straw was that broke the proverbial back of this entity, but what we can be sure of is that it finally woke up. When it did, it finally took notice of the universe that was suckling from it like parasites and triggered the Quiet Rapture. While it could have simply swatted away our universe, I think that it is much more likely that it woke up hungry and proceeded to devour all that it could. The reason why moons and asteroids and starships were left behind was because they were simply crumbs too small for it to care about. As for the blood oceans, they are all that is left of humanity. If this entity is spiteful enough, it could have taken these parasites that were leeching off of it and ground them into a fine slurry, before they drained back through the tears in reality, creating these blood oceans. This would imply that what we found within this trench would exist on the other moons with blood oceans, as each of those moons were colonized worlds for the civilization. It could just be that their great cities are covered in choking layers of congealed blood, and that this trench was a pocket of exposed city, and that's why the Consolidation of Iron is sending us down to investigate this specific trench. If this is indeed the only blood ocean where they have found the remains of the ancient cities, then perhaps they are looking for a way to harness the power of the entity for themselves. One last mystery that we haven't really touched on is what the creatures are beneath the blood, and the answer is likely just as horrific as the source of the blood itself. These creatures are highly mutated humans, although whether they are former citizens of the city or those that came after is up for speculation. However, we can be 99% certain that these creatures are not entirely alien simply by looking at their skeletons. Granted, across human history, aliens have been depicted as being similar to that of Earth, and it could always be the case here that Szymanski didn't want to get into the weird world of speculative biology. I'm doing my best to look over the story scientifically, and it's highly unlikely that the bones and body plans of complex alien life from different planets would look so similar to Earth's. Not only that, but I think the same reason why these creatures aren't alien in origin is the same reason they aren't the products of any animals other than human. It would be rather strange to have an entire ocean made up exclusively of human blood, only to have creatures that have evolved from fish or cows or alien horrors. There's something strangely human about this ocean, and diverting from that idea now feels like we'd be heading off on some tangent. Speaking of the creatures within the blood, however, one thing we can definitively note is that we are not being stalked by a single monster. It is far more likely that there are at least 2 different creatures following us, and the evidence comes down to the eyes we see. Comparing the faces of the first creature we saw and the one that attacked us at the end, they line up rather well. They both have the same wide mouth, broad face, and sunken eyes. These sunken eyes, however, do not look like the eye that we photographed on our way to the second building. That one was not quite so sunken and was surrounded by scales. With the size of the eye, we can assume this beast is the larger of the two, and in all likelihood took a much more active role in pushing around the vessel. It's far more likely that this one was the beast that was pushing us all around the trench, while a smaller one hung back and waited for its chance to move in for the kill. But that doesn't answer how some of the pieces connect to the larger mystery. How does the SM-8 fit into all this? What was with the strange letter that we found on our ship? And what exactly did the civilization do to awaken the entity beyond the veil? The letter makes a note of saying that the hope within the void is just as ephemeral as the Starlight, suggesting what the Consolidation of Iron is looking for is a bit of a fool's errand. But what if the COI wasn't actually looking for a way to terraform dead moons? What if the Quiet Rapture wasn't the accidental result of mankind pushing too far into forces beyond their control, but the result of a ritual to reach beyond the veil? This may just sound like it's all some far-strung theory, even more delusional than what I've presented so far. But what if the people of this lost faction were actually attempting to seek Ascension? The game does not hold any evidence to support this theory because it's not the theory that I hold from the game. Instead, we will need to look outside towards the story presented on the big screen. If you have not seen the Iron Lung movie yet, this will be your chance to turn this video off and come back later. Seriously, go watch the movie. It's really good, and what I'm going to talk about next will make a lot more sense if you've actually seen it. Since the movie is still in theaters as I am writing this, I don't really have much footage to use besides the trailers. As such, I unfortunately can't really use any examples of the scenes I am talking about unless they were in the trailers, so you'll have to suffer through more game footage rather than showing you my examples. Maybe in the future I'll revisit the movie and do a video on the story of Simon. Unlike the game, I won't be doing a full breakdown of the story of the movie, and instead I will be loosely guiding us through and highlighting the parts that I want to point out towards the theory. Since the game and the movie exist in separate canons, this sort of Ascension theory will come with a few caveats. The main assumption we will have to make is that we are assuming that our current theory up to this point is the same between both the game and the movie. We don't get to see any buildings or signs of civilization beneath the blood, as the movie is much more focused on Simon and his slow descent into madness. However, my theories for the movie sort of piggyback off of the theories for the games, so we'll just need to accept the game's findings as facts to the movie if we are to proceed. The other major assumption we will need to make is that much of what we see in the movie is actually real, or at the very least influenced by outside forces. Isolation can break down the human mind, and according to Ava, Simon had been alone for days before the movie comes to its climax. Not only that, but there are multiple instances where Simon suffers head trauma, worsening his condition. As such, there is the lingering question throughout the film about how much of what he experienced is real. From the start, the movie follows the first half of the game by skipping over most of it. Simon moves from point to point, taking pictures and not really finding a whole lot of anything. It isn't until he finds the skeleton that we get our first major deviation from the game, and the story of the movie actually begins. The skeleton is a bit odd to look at, but something tosses around the SM-13, and Simon is brought back up to the surface. Honestly, this is one of the two parts of the movie that I think really added to the story and the setting, as even through the blood-slit glass, we take a brief look at the COI facility monitoring the ocean. In my opinion, it just helps ground the setting a bit more because these people are on the moon with Simon. They don't have any fancy technology that lets them handle all this stuff remotely, and that also means that they are there in the event things go incredibly right or incredibly wrong. The movie plays with our doubts quite a lot, and the first major instances of this is with the skeleton and what the COI called a release of gases from the moon. According to the COI, the bottom of the blood ocean is just congealed blood, and so there's frequent events where the landscape may shift due to escaping gases, but this is called into question with the camera. After Simon activates it out of frustration, we learn that the camera uses radiation to look through the blood, and are even given an X-ray of the people directly in front of it. Of course, this means the skeleton may not have been a skeleton at all, and the movement down there was because the creature was still alive and woke up. These doubts about whether or not it's a skeleton are only deepened once Simon heads back down, only to find the skeleton is gone. It's on his way back down that we get more of Simon's backstory, which I'll touch on in a minute, as well as the first point towards whether the events of the movie actually happened. Since Simon is dropped rather quickly down into the blood, he falls over and hits his head on the metal floor, knocking himself out. Simon suffers a few instances of head trauma throughout the movie, and it's after each instance that something strange happens. Now, not every odd occurrence is preceded by a blow to the head, but the first truly supernatural phenomena don't occur until after this point. While Simon communicates with David over the radio, we get a shadow of something moving into the corner when no entity is actually there. However, it does lead Simon towards finding the note telling him to cross the wires, and to the pendant from Eden. Again, assuming that the shadow was real and not a result of a possible concussion, I believe that the entity we see aboard the ship is actually trying to help Simon. Whether it's to save him or lure him towards the light, I'm not entirely sure of, for reasons I'll get into later. The message that plays on the terminal is the same as the letter from the game, which brings up the earlier point of preserving the message on the terminal. This time, however, the note does come with a second warning, as the note to cross the wires was written on the back of a page from the manual. This leads Simon towards finding the page in the manual and realizing that David lied to him while they were talking beforehand. Despite what Simon was told, he is blasted with radiation every time he uses the camera, meaning the COI was likely intending for him to die down there in one way or another. Now, I've already speculated that maybe the Coalition of Iron doesn't exactly have the most upstanding people running it, so I won't reiterate all of that here. There's plenty of examples throughout the movie that the COI is a little more on the authoritarian side, but rather than treading that same path we already took, the movie also gives us a bit more of a glimpse into Eden. Specifically, in the same conversation with Ava after mentioning the skeleton has seemingly vanished, Simon mentions that Eden has given up hope. The universe is dying, and the people aboard the Eden space station have begun to lose their will to live, and have accepted the fact that humanity is doomed. Especially towards the end of the movie, however, we get much more information through Simon's hallucinations. In a delirious state, whether from oxygen deprivation or the effects of the isolation, or even the influence of the entity, we can hear voices of the past calling out to Simon, haunting him. It's through these voices and some of Simon's own admissions earlier that we learn that the last tree in the universe has died. If we are going with the theory that the attack on Filament Station was done in retaliation, then I believe that this is the reason why. The COI had moved to claim the last tree by force, and it resulted in its death, and based on some of the other lines that we can pick out, this was more devastating to Eden than we first thought. What stood out to me the most was towards the end of the segment where we hear two people giving what sounds like a sermon, one of them speaking it and the other repeating it later. This sermon talks about how the last tree will live again and how it will grow from the soil of their corpses, leading me to believe that Eden revered the last tree as some symbol of divinity. It's honestly not that hard to imagine a group of people worshipping what they believe to be the last sign of hope when all else is gone. When that hope was destroyed, its people then turned towards punishing the people they deemed responsible, and those that remained behind turned towards nihilism. If Eden was in fact made up of religious zealots, then it would help explain half of the creature's mindset later on in the movie. We not only get a better sense of Eden throughout the story, but the SM-13's pilot as well. Considering the game leaves the convict as a faceless and nameless character for the player to project themselves onto, there was a lot of room to build up Simon as a character. The picture painted by the movie takes the base concept and expands it in such a way that Simon is, and has always been, a prisoner. Even though Simon was a member of Eden since he was a child, he doesn't seem to share in their views. He was branded with their mark and lived among them, clearly caring for his old life by the way he mourns its loss. However, he makes it known during the conversation with Ava that he did not choose to become one of them, and later dismisses any notions of their religion, shunning any ideas of divinity. Still, Simon lived amongst them and even agreed to participate in the Battle of Filament Station, which is where everything went wrong. Filament Station was destroyed and Simon was captured alongside others from the battle, and are now left to serve as disposable tools for the COI. It's likely Simon never had true control over his life, and while I believe he believes the destruction of Filament Station was never a part of the plan, it honestly might have been. Worse, Simon may have been set up to take the fall. My only real evidence for this comes at the very end of the movie when he is hearing all these voices, as he is frequently referred to as a butcher with too much blood on his hands. While this could potentially just be a reference to the battle as a whole, one line leads me to believe otherwise. One haunting voice tells Simon that all it told him to do was cross the wires, which upon first viewing may refer to the log from the terminal, but that doesn't make much sense. Each of the voices seem to be what people have said to Simon in the past, which means this line would be no exception. I think that the original plan Simon was informed of was to sabotage the reactor to stop working, not cause it to melt down. This was likely done to earn his cooperation, and the voice line we are hearing may have been from someone higher in command, distancing themselves from Simon's actions. They may have given the order to cross the wires and blow up the station, but Simon was the one to carry it out. Moving back towards the story, the movie's second act is heralded with the oxygen level dropping, immediately after which he finds the skeleton again and rams into it. We also get a proper look at the skeleton at this point, and it's almost human-like. It's as though someone took their jaw and stretched wide, lining their mouth with countless razor-sharp teeth. When Simon goes to confirm he impaled the skeleton, however, he sees a second face peering out through the gloom. Just like with the game, it's possible that there are two different creatures that follow around the SM-13. We even get to hear both creatures speak to us through the movie, each seemingly after two different goals. But in all honesty, it's hard to tell beyond their dialogue which creature is which. Whenever a creature is nearby, it almost seems to change its mind on certain actions or even give conflicting motivations for what it's doing. And so I'm curious as to whether this isn't a case of two separate creatures, but two minds wrestling for control of the same body. Regardless of the answer, Simon is dragged into the tunnels by something. And when he eventually wakes up, everything except the camera has been shut off. I feel as though where the first act sort of laid out our story and the third act focuses on Simon's last desperate attempt to escape from the ocean, the second act feels like it stretches the limits of the original gameplay and vision of the submarine to its limits. An example of this would be Simon using the camera as a light source when all other lights have gone out, when the camera was already such an integral focal point of the player's experience. This leads Simon to putting tape over the button to keep it active, while he looks for a way to turn the power back on. When he heads down into the crawl space, there is the brief flash of something moving up above, and in all likelihood, it's the same entity Simon had seen before that led him to the note and the wires. What it is doing up there, we can't be too sure of. The tape is laying on the ground, no longer covering the button, but it's hard to attribute this to the entity, as we see the tape peel itself off while Simon attempts to map out the caves. What is more likely is that the entity was removing the safety shield over the front window, as when Simon re-emerges, what looks like an eye stares back at him. Whatever it is, it swims up in front of the ship, nearly breaking the glass and flooding Simon within. If this figure is the same one as before, then it would seem a bit strange it would try to kill Simon when I had said it was trying to help him. What would make more sense then would be if this figure was of two minds on the matter, just like the creature swimming through the blood. This may seem a little far-fetched until we get a good look at this thing haunting the ship later on. After Simon wakes up from his nightmares, having seen what lies beyond the light, we get a shot of this humanoid creature on the ship, with a wide jaw filled with razor-sharp teeth. It's something I didn't piece together right away, but I think this is a manifestation of what the creature once was, back when it was still human. However, its form is horribly mangled and twisted, and I think it has something to do with the fact that there may be two different minds within the creature. Once the safety barrier has been sealed up, however, we get a chance to look at the coordinates on the console, placing Simon approximately near X of 700 and Y of 600. Consulting the map, this is in the upper right portion, and this seems to be confirmed with Simon's exploration for a way out. We get the opportunity to see Simon mapping out the cavern using nothing but the camera, the proximity sensors, and the coordinates, and in all honesty, I love this part of the movie. Mainly the reason I love it so much is because I believe this would be a good way to expand upon the game itself, hiding secrets within undocumented caves that the player would need to blindly map out for themselves, with perhaps more answers being found deep within. If we follow Simon's map, he goes around the large ring in the top right, moving clockwise. It isn't until he finds the SM-8 that we can start to get more pieces to this puzzle, and upon trying to leave the caves through the west tunnel, he makes contact with someone over the radio. The movie never mentions the names of either crew member aboard the SM-8, and it isn't even until later that we learn that the SM-8 is the submersible that the two had been piloting. To help distinguish between the two of them, I will be referring to them as the researcher and the assistant, as both play a vital role. It is the assistant that Simon talks to during this portion of the movie as she is begging for help, and it is here that we learn a bit more information. First off, we can tell the assistant is not alone, as they refer to themselves in the plural form we and us, and while it could be referring to a collective we within the blood, I do not believe either of them were assimilated into the blood. At least, not entirely. Instead, I believe that the creature following the ship is the mutated form of both the assistant and the researcher. Both went down into the blood on the SM-8, which was specifically a research vessel rather than one meant for surveillance, and it wouldn't be until Simon returns to the SM-8 for the black box information that we hear their transformation. Specifically, we hear the researcher talking about their findings, about how the blood can be used to create food, yet advises against this. She states that it is because it is human blood, but in the audio, we can hear another reason. The assistant has been drinking the blood before her voice becomes horrid screams and guttural groans, and soon enough the researcher makes the same noises. This is likely the moment the two of them fused into one entity, the blood altering the assistant and allowing her to assimilate the researcher into her body, even as it bent and broke into its current form. Knowing this, we can begin to understand either soul's motivations by looking at where they came from. The researcher would most likely be a member of the Consolidation of Iron, devoted to her mission of searching the Blood Ocean for answers, and brought along with her was one of the prisoners from Eden. The assistant seems to know Simon through their shared affiliation to Eden, even if they don't know each other personally. She references Eden during their talks, but if she was one of the people that was taken as prisoners during the Battle of Filament Station, then it feels more likely she was captured during the early stages. With Eden set up as a religious cult devoted to tending to the last remaining tree within the universe, perhaps the assistant found a new god to follow on AT5. The assistant talks about a mysterious light that is supposedly a fragment of that which caused the quiet rapture, and that it is what is sustaining the two of them down there. After Simon has a breakdown over his place within all this and his involvement in Filament Station, the assistant gives him the coordinates of 116 and 520. Consulting with our map, these coordinates line up to the same general area as where the anomaly is in-game, and we can now be sure of where this voice is leading him. Along the way, the assistant asks Simon his thoughts about the existence of God before getting a bit philosophical about it. Specifically, she makes mention of how God looks into the universe through a pinhole and it thinks, therefore we are. This last statement can be taken a number of different ways, the most obvious being more Lovecraftian. Specifically, it brings to mind the blind idiot god of Lovecraft's works, as this is the core idea behind Azathoth. As it slumbers, our universe is allowed to exist within its dreams, and should it ever awaken, those dreams will cease to exist. I don't think it's meant to be taken quite so literally, however. Instead, I think it is referring to the numerous minds present within the blood, as the ocean itself is clearly its own distinct entity. If this is actually the case, then it's likely the entity has a stronger connection to the blood than first thought. Not only that, but we can see the collective we within the blood throughout the movie. Whenever pictures are being taken, we can occasionally notice sets of eyes in the darkness as small pinpricks of light. It makes it feel as though those within the blood are at least somewhat still conscious, and are haunting where they once called home. When Simon finds the anomaly and photographs it, it is then that everything begins to break down. The assistant calls him by his name, which Simon never spoke to it, and there is the reveal of the cord to the radio being cut. This is another point where the movie preys on the viewer's doubts, as we find later that the radio was still plugged in and operational, leaving us to question how much of what we see during this sequence is actually real. Since the creature begins speaking directly into Simon's head, however, it is entirely possible that this and the visions were the only things that did not happen. The creature would have left Simon feeling cut off from all but itself as a way to get him to surrender to the entity beyond the light, when in reality Simon was likely fleeing from the light as he hallucinated. When he finally comes to, he's no longer around the light and is instead closer to the entrance to the map's north side, making contact with the COI. The visions Simon experienced, however, give us the clearest depiction of what this entity is. After the creature bursts through the hull, it almost seems to deposit Simon on the surface of the blood ocean before sinking back down beneath the tides. It is here we get a look at the tendrils not just beneath the blood, but connecting to Simon. These fibers are likely representative of the collective mind within the blood, as once one has become ensnared within its web, the blood will never release its prisoner. They will be drawn into the collective mind, flesh assimilated into the ocean. These fibers all lead back to that great and terrible eye looking down atop Simon, and this horrible visage but a fragment of the god within the blood. So what exactly is this entity, and what happened to the people of this civilization on AT5? I believe that this god is what the civilization was drawing power from to fuel their societies on barren worlds, and the more they took, the more the entity took awareness of them. However, I do not think that it alone was responsible for the quiet rapture. Instead, it had help from these people. To understand why, we need only to look at the words of the assistant. She told Simon that the light is what is sustaining them and almost has a single-minded devotion to this god, proclaiming that the light was meant for us. At the end of the movie, when the creature is chasing Simon's ship, we can hear other pieces of broken dialogue of how we are salvation, we can save everyone, and how we are one, living within the blood. The god looked upon the civilization that was tapping into its power and began whispering into their minds, offering a way to end suffering. Beyond just making their moon worlds habitable, this entity offered the people a way to shed their mortal flesh and live in immortality. And thus, they would perform some sort of ritual. The result of this ritual was the Quiet Rapture. If I had to guess as to what happened, what the civilization did was attempt to open a gateway, allowing the entity to come through into our universe, but it had only partially succeeded. It tore open enough of a hole in space for the light to shine through, a fragment of its being, but it would prove to be enough. The god absorbed all energy that it could, from the great generators of the stars to the conscious minds of those aboard habitable planets. It was unable to swallow the universe entirely before, but it still hungers for us. The blood is not just the vessel in which those that were consumed are being held, but it is a direct extension of this entity. It had granted them the gifts that it had promised. These people no longer need to eat or sleep or fear death, but they are chained to its will and exist as a scarlet ocean across their former homes. Should the entity fully breach into our reality, it will likely consume all that remains, bringing the rest of humanity into its horrid ocean. Then, without any rocks left to house the oceans, humanity will be trapped with it beyond the veil, within this god's own reality. When Simon's vision is broken, we get a brief flash of this eye within the blood that he vomits, signaling that he is already being assimilated. It has its tendrils in Simon and will not let go so easily, leading us to the movie's climax. Given the orders to retrieve the information from the SM-8 in exchange for his freedom, we see Simon collect the pieces of map that have fallen off the wall and into the blood. It stains the upper half, signaling to us, the audience, that if Simon goes back there, only death awaits him. Still, Simon ventures back into the caves and the submarine begins to fail him. Ever since he first went into the ocean, blood has been leaking in, only a few drops at first, but now it does so freely. Yet it doesn't just burst in and kill him. Instead, it sustains him. The rising oxygen levels, I believe, are meant to symbolize the immortality being offered to Simon. If he submits to this god, he too can live forever within the blood, and if you think about it, that's really what Simon is after. Simon's motivations for working with the COI, for pushing through to escape from the caverns, and even for fighting on Filament Station, is that he wants to live. Simon is driven by that innate force within all of us to continue fighting until our very last breath. He has seen that impulse die out in the people of Eden, their hope withering with the death of the last tree, and nearly succumbed to it himself when his oxygen was running low. It is in what should be his last remaining hours of life that the creature guided Simon towards the light as a solution to his problems, and where Simon beheld the truth of that offer. Immortality comes at the cost of one's autonomy. When he rejects this offer, the blood begins to take him by force. Removing the bandages on his arms, it's clear that either the blood or the radiation from the camera have begun to break down his body, the places where he had been wounded earlier now covered in growths. All around Simon, the blood has begun to form coagulated stringy veins that hang down from the ceiling and cling to the walls and equipment, forcibly attempting to claim the SM-13 and Simon along with it. While we got more out of Eden in this movie, I do feel as though we got a bit more out of the Coalition of Iron as well, seeing a bit more of a human side to them through Ava. In the beginning, Ava is how we would expect someone working for the COI to operate. She is cold, efficient, and does not seem to care at all for the well-being of Simon. This last fact is only driven in further when we learn Ava never actually knew Simon's name. While her subordinate, David, does show some compassion to Simon, saying he would have told him more information if he had been in charge, David never really lets up in his own actions. He still lies to Simon about the truth of the camera's radiation, and by the end of the movie is resolute in following their orders not to venture back into the blood. Ava, however, does offer Simon true compassion. It was stated a large part of her anger came from how protective she is of her own crew, citing her disregard and outright contempt for Simon after firing the camera while out of the ocean, and yet she performs what is possibly the true spirit of conviction realization. There are many ways to go about paying off one's crimes, but they largely boil down to either punishment or rehabilitation. Punishment, such as incarceration, is used more as a deterrent to a society's free people against committing crimes in the first place, and those within the system being examples of what happens when you fail to play by the rules. Rehabilitation, however, is more focused on the prisoners themselves and on turning them into more productive members of society. The journey down in the Iron Lung is a punishment for Simon. It deters the other factions from wanting to declare war on the Coalition of Iron, lest they want their own prisoners to suffocate in the dark, while also delivering their sense of justice upon those within. If the COI really wished to allow Simon to reintegrate into society, they would have gone about it much differently. By having one repay their crimes through labor to the collective, they are able to spend time around its people, coming to know them personally by being out in the field. The idea then is that the convict will see the impact their actions have on other people, and how by aiding people through performing repairs or other such tasks, they are bettering the lives of others. When Ava makes the deal with Simon to release him if he can retrieve the contents of the SM-8's black box, she offers him the chance to reintegrate into the COI society. What is most telling is that she is the one to offer her name first, extending a hand towards Simon to understand each other not as a member of COI and Eden, or as a jailer and convict, but as individual people. This rehabilitation and compassion is what likely left Ava's dying words to sink in all the more in Simon's head. Not all of us get to be saved. What they are doing down there may be to the benefit of all of humanity, but that doesn't mean everyone involved will get to see it through to the end. Sometimes the sacrifices of the few are necessary for the many to carry on. When Ava dies in the jaws of the creature, Simon risks going down into the blood and retrieving the black box from the sub, but by this point the blood has decided to take him by force. The tendrils reaching out to Simon hold him in place and start to break him down, their grip so strong that Simon has to tear his own arm off in order to escape. Even as he is covered in blood, we can see the effects are growing worse, his body covered in the growths as he is slowly being absorbed. While the camera is rather shaky by this point, we can see large jagged teeth puncturing through the hull of the vessel as the creature bites down onto it, and the dialogue we hear from it is rather conflicting. This is largely why I believe the researcher and the assistant were merged into one body, as the creature both tells Simon to accept the blood as well as telling him that the rest of humanity should not know. We even get confirmation that the creature is at least one of the two members aboard the SM-8, as it describes the information Simon holds as being from their ship, before giving two different points of view. On one hand, the creature tells Simon that the light can save him, that it can save everyone, and that they are already doomed. This is the only way forward. On the other, it expresses that this madness will end with Simon, and that he saw the horror of what this god is. If anything, it wants him to carry this information back. These last few lines especially do not sound like one who would want Simon to bring the information back to the rest of humanity, potentially drawing them in so that they themselves may be assimilated. If anything, it sounds like the creature is protecting the rest of humanity. This is where we get the split minds of the creature, with the devout assistant wanting Simon to join their collective, while the researcher wants to stop Simon from leaving and to stop this god from spreading its influence. It's a bit ironic then that the two seem to have their ideologies swapped. It is the convict from the nationalistic and individualistic Eden that wishes for humanity to become as one, and the researcher working for a collectivist organization founded on the will of the people that is fighting for humans to remain as individuals. Despite either side wrestling for control and the creature overall fighting to kill Simon, its efforts would be in vain. The vessel would rupture and explode, likely from the remaining fuel igniting from the frequent sparks of the equipment, and kill the creature alongside Simon. While it ends much the same way as the game, with Simon being killed by the creature, the movie's ending does have one major deviation from the game. Tying into Simon's character arc, he's given the temptation of immortality, a chance to continue living, and rejects it wholeheartedly. Instead, his focus was on preserving the black box so that the rest of humanity would be warned of what's down there. In all likelihood, it's possible that Simon triggered the explosion himself as one last act of defiance against the creature, but the end result was still the same. Not everyone got the chance to make it out, but those that didn't ensured the rest of humanity had a chance. Floating in a life jacket above the ocean is the black box of the SM-13, and the flashlight signals that someone seems to have found it. The game left us with the knowledge that all that we have found had been lost, the wreckage beyond salvage, and none of our findings having made it to the surface. Here, however, the events of the movie are laid out in audio recordings, written documents from the SM-13, and logs of the ship's systems. With this, the Coalition of Iron will learn the truth of what is down there. What they do with this information, whether they join the blood as a singular being or reject the gifts that it offers, will land squarely on the shoulders of the rest of humanity. All while the dying Starlight shines as pale as bones beneath the tides, and the universe fades into oblivion. Thank you to those that stuck around until the very end. This video was a bit different from my usual ones, mainly because I wanted to talk about the movie and because I had never played Iron Lung before. In order to work on the movie portion, I ended up having to go back to the theater to watch it again, picking a time where nobody was around, so I could take notes on my phone under the cover of my jacket. I had just made this on a sort of spur-of-the-moment decision after watching the movie the first time, which meant pushing back other stuff I'm working on. It did, however, give me the time to step back and plan out what I want to get done this year, and while it may be a bit tight in some areas, I'm hoping to stick with that plan. That plan is to get out a video roughly every 2 months or so, going through the fall and winter months of Persona 3, as well as covering God of War 2 and 3. As for also covering Persona 3's The Answer and the spin-off God of War games, I'm of half a mind on those, but that will be a decision for the following year. This video probably would have been out sooner were it not for also putting a bit more time into a much larger project I hope to get out for the end of the year, and the release of Sons of Sparta. As soon as that game came out, my work on this just kinda stopped because I was having a lot of fun with that game. That being said, I will be taking the last week of this month to rest, celebrate my birthday, and probably get the Platinum Trophy for Sons of Sparta before diving back into Persona 3. To those of you new to the channel, I hope you decide to stick around and subscribe. We're getting closer to hitting 600 subscribers, which I'll be hoping to hit by the year's end. Feel free to like the video as well, and leave a comment about your own thoughts about the Iron Lung game and the movie. It was definitely a lot better than I had expected it to be, and we'll probably watch it again once it's out for streaming. This has been Lore Master Zarek, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon.